Hi everyone, and thank you all for joining our short session today in Getting to Net Zero, the role of funding climate action. This is a part of a bite-sized webinar series that we're doing over the next few weeks on engaging in the voluntary carbon market. And this is to support companies, no matter where they are in their climate journey, to navigate carbon markets, understand how and why we need to be dramatically scaling and refining mechanisms of channeling finance into climate action. So we hope to make it clear to everyone listening today that we can't afford to lose time. So a quick bit of housekeeping. As usual, you've found that you're on mute as you've joined the session today, and you will remain so for the remainder of the session. There is a Q&A box, so if you do have any questions, please feel free to post them in there. We will have a short time to go through questions at the end, and any that we don't get to, we'll respond to you via email. So over to your speakers for today. One is me. My name is Tara Oakley, and I lead South Pole's commercial team in the Oceania region. And I'm joined today by Daniela Gomez, who is a senior specialist in our carbon trading analytics team. And we both join you from our Melbourne office, and we'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners on the land of which we join you from today, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. And we pay our respects to elders past and present. And we extend this to the traditional owners of the various countries you're joining us from today as well. So hopefully, if you've made your way to this webinar today, you already know a little bit about South Pole, but for those of you that don't, a quick intro about us. So over the last 17 years, we've grown from a group of university friends in Switzerland. We've now got over 1,300 people in over 50 locations around the world. We've all helped to develop over 850 projects and also supported thousands of companies to reduce their climate impact as well. So into the session, despite COVID and the conflict that we've seen in Europe as well, and the risk of recession, it's really clear that climate remains a mega trend. And these conditions seem to have triggered a new wave of climate action by companies who've been exposed to the fragility of their supply chains and their resilience on fossil fuels. And in fact, oversight of supply chains and the vulnerabilities here and building resilience to these external shocks are now ranked among the top 3 drivers for setting net zero targets. And we can see here from the number of companies making commitments through the Science Based Target Initiative, or SBTI as we'll use throughout the session. There's a lot of people getting on board here as well, and sustainable lending is also on the rise. But we certainly have a long way to go. And let's be clear, no one said it's going to be easy. We're still falling quite short of the actions and ambitions that's needed to halve our emissions by 2030 and reach net zero emissions by 2050. The current policies and pledges that we have in place, which are the kind of green and purple on this chart here, they don't take us to a 1.5 degree future. And so with the private sector responsible for around 75% of global greenhouse gas emissions at the moment, this ambition gap requires strong leadership and action from the private sector. But it also holds a lot of opportunities for those taking action too, which is great. So if we put this into numbers, reports have suggested that by 2030, we're actually going to need around $5 trillion a year in climate finance to achieve this, which is quite a substantial amount of money. And if we look at what we're currently doing, developed countries are pledging 100 billion, and the voluntary carbon market, where it's expected to grow by 2030, is around 10 to 40 billion dollars, which is a big jump from where we are today at around 2 billion. But also quite clearly, this is a long way to go, and we do need more finance to make sure that we can achieve our goals here. So let's just take a step back before we dive into carbon credits and some projects that we've got to show to you today as well, and really just understand what a carbon credit is. So formally, 1 carbon credit means 1 tonne of CO2 equivalent that has been either reduced or removed from the atmosphere through an emissions reduction project, and it's based on a number of criteria and safeguards that uphold this, and it's required to go through a verification process with specific standards and third-party verification as well. But we like to look at carbon credits in another way, and in very simple terms, they are a finance mechanism. And we can kind of split these across 2 different ways, so global and company level. If we look on the global side, financing climate action projects is essentially a cost-effective and immediate and scalable route to drive down global emissions and the transition to net zero as well by funding nature projects, new technologies, and through a just transition. So they really just channel vital investment into forestry protection, for example, or local communities, renewable energy projects in the global south, where there are actually a few other revenue streams that are available to them at the moment. And at the company level as well, this is going to help you put a price on carbon. So creating a cost of these externalities on your balance sheet is really what's going to drive some of that change as well. That's what the CFOs and CEOs of your businesses are looking for, and they can understand it, they can see it once it's on your balance sheet. It really puts a cost to polluting, and so it's an incentive then, a financial incentive to reduce emissions in your value chain. And in fact, there's some research that has come out from a couple of different parties recently that shows that those buying credits are actually reducing their emissions twice as quickly as those who are not purchasing credits, which I think is quite an interesting fact there. And we've got calls from the UNDP, IPCC, SBTi, among others as well, that have really made it clear that companies need to invest in climate action outside their value chains on top of reducing their own emissions. But one of the big questions has been around whether buying carbon credits actually slows down action and, is a license to pollute. But this research really shows us that quite the opposite thing has been found. And so financing climate action is good for the planet, as we've already established, and helping us achieve net zero, but it's also good for businesses too. So let's kind of break this down into these 4 points. So it really is clear that customers care about climate action, but we understand that communicating about carbon is quite difficult. And so with these projects, communicating about tangible benefits to people and forests on the ground is quite a powerful tool. And so with stories from these projects, you can then engage with your stakeholders, whether that's investors, consumers, internal stakeholders. They're all brought on your climate journey as well. It's also going to be a way for you to contribute to meeting international best practice. So as I already mentioned, there are leading initiatives out there that are calling for companies to fund climate action outside of their value chains. So there's that to consider. Looking at measurable and transparent impact. So we've got a lot of governance in place around these projects that help measure and certify the impact. And there's not really any other financing mechanism at the moment that can claim this level of transparency as carbon credits can. And contributions are internationally approved carbon certification standards. They undergo third-party verification, audits, certification. And so there are a lot of conversations about this topic in the media at the moment, and Daniela will expand on that in her section a little bit later. So for now, I'll just take you through to item 4 here, looking at building your brand and showing leadership. And so leadership to us is acknowledging that transitions are challenging and we can't really leave anybody behind. So funding climate action allows companies to measurably create benefits aligned to the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So that's it from me for now. I'll hand over to Danny to take you through how carbon credits fit into your strategy, as well as to take you through some example projects as well. Over to you, Danny.
Thank you, Tara, and hi everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I'll walk you through how contributions fit into your company's net zero strategy. So first, we need to set near and long-term targets and reduce emissions to a residual level in line with 1.5 degree scenarios, which is 80 to 90% depending on the industry, and by no later than 2050. While some companies have set net zero targets before 2030, many have found that the business's transformation required to cut emissions by 80 to 90% will take a number of years and the technology is not available. We've seen companies with ambitious targets postponing them to further in the future, but time is unfortunately not on our side. The window to address climate change is closing. So what needs to happen? Companies need to seize the opportunity to accelerate the net zero transition, especially before 2030. So this is why the transition to achieving net zero, companies should take action to mitigate emissions and finance removals beyond their value chains. This is represented here in the graph in light green. Lastly, once emissions have been reduced by 80 to 90%, companies need to neutralize their residual emissions. This means that unavoidable greenhouse gases released into the atmosphere when the company has achieved their long-term targets must be counterbalanced through the permanent removal and storage of carbon from the atmosphere. Removals are represented here in the graph in dark green. There might be a long-term role for carbon credits from removal activities that help companies achieve this. So certified contributions have a key role to play in a holistic net zero strategy in 2 different ways. On the way to net zero, called beyond value chain mitigation, this isn't just a nice to have. The SBTi strongly recommends that companies take immediate action to go above and beyond their science-based targets to contribute to reaching global net zero through value chain mitigation. Examples of these could include buying high-quality forest protection carbon credits that support countries to raise ambition. And more SBTi guidance on beyond value chain mitigation is coming soon, following their public consultation on this that closed at the end of July. And at net zero, when the residual 10% of emissions need to be neutralized through removing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. If we can move on to the next slide. So how do you set yourself up today to maximize impact and achieve net zero? So first of all, we recommend starting with supporting avoidance projects and integrating carbon removal projects over time into your portfolio for maximum climate benefit and to align to your net zero objectives. Carbon avoidance projects prevent emissions from being released today and are vital in transferring the finance and technology needed for polluting industries. For example, energy generation to decarbonize. I think we can all agree that this is pretty urgent. And carbon removal projects, on the other side, both nature-based and technology-based, lower the concentration of carbon in the atmosphere and will become increasingly important as we move closer to the global net zero target. And by 2050, the need for carbon removal increases as well. As we move to net zero, natural and technological removals will be key in reaching corporate climate targets and global goals. So we need companies to start investing in removals today. This is illustrative of what a portfolio could look like. So avoidance credits supported and slowly phased out with nature-based solutions, which are more widely available and bring many co-benefits and share of technical carbon removals. And of course, the exact portfolio mix of for a company will vary depending on availability and potential compliance measures. To the next slide. So you might be wondering what is required for an activity to qualify as a carbon project. So of course, it needs to be a real project proven to have genuinely taken place. It needs to be additional, meaning that the sequestration or avoided emissions must be additional to what would otherwise have occurred without a management intervention or activity. The impact must be quantifiable, so using recognized monitoring practices and methodologies. An independent third-party auditor must be able to verify that these reductions have indeed taken place. They need to be permanent, meaning that sequestration or avoided emissions must have durability, usually for at least 100 years. And uniqueness, only one carbon credit can be associated with a single reduction or removal of 1 ton of CO2, so no double counting between projects. These conditions are not common, and for these reasons, no other form of finance can claim the level of transparency and traceability in measuring impacts as that channeled through carbon markets. Yet, criticism has come, and rightly so in some cases. Scrutiny is needed, but we must remember that at its core, the voluntary market is founded on continuous improvement, and we all have a role to play in this. For example, the standards need to ensure that methodologies are as agile as possible, with more diverse feedback. There will always be new scientific development and technologies that will supersede that which was previously considered to be good practice, and this is a feature and not a bug. Developers like us in the South Pole can support improving these standards by using practical on-the-ground experience to improve best practices. Continuous development is in the DNA of our sector and is a sign of a healthy system. The big challenge is that the complexity of the voluntary carbon markets makes it difficult to understand and easy to criticize. So companies must ensure that they are funding climate action responsibly and effectively to achieve maximum impacts and not misleading consumers. Now let's take a quick look at some projects. So Mount Mulgrave. In the Australian outback, Mount Mulgrave Station in far north Queensland faces the relentless challenge of mitigating the frequency and intensity of uncontrolled wildfires. The station spans an area of 280,000 hectares. For perspective, a football field is equivalent to 1 hectare. This means that the property size is approximately similar to that of the city of Adelaide or the islands of Samoa. Intense wildfires can inflict substantial damage on savannas ecosystems as they instantly disrupt the ecosystem's natural equilibrium and resilience. Controlled burns help reduce the fuel load by burning off the excess vegetation on the ground and promoting healthier vegetation growth underneath. So under the Emissions Reductions Fund, various types of projects can generate Australian carbon credit units for their efforts to avoid or reduce emissions. The fire management method uses techniques that reduce the risk of wildfires. So the planned burnings occur in the early dry season between January and July, aiming to reduce the frequency and intensity of uncontrolled late dry season wildfires. The Mount Mulgrave project effectively avoids and minimizes the carbon emissions that would otherwise be released into the atmosphere and if wildfires were to occur. So as a result, this project generates carbon credits for the avoided emissions. Now we have the clean cooking solutions with Worldwide Fund. So in China's most isolated communities, cooking and heating needs are typically met through inefficient stoves, which also expose families to toxic indoor air pollution. The wood needed for cooking and heating typically comes from nearby forests. And for decades, the deep mountain communities of central China have collected their wood from the nearby nature reserve, part of the Xingling Giant Panda Conservation Network, gradually degrading and encroaching on crucial giant panda habitat. By reconstructing or improving low efficiency built-in stoves, the project is creating healthier, more sustainable cooking and heating practices. The improved stoves are up to 70% more efficient and families use significantly less wood when cooking as well. So the project promotes more sustainable resource use and ease deforestation. They also feature chimneys that filter out toxic smoke, creating a healthier kitchen environment, and the project alleviates much of the burden of wood chopping and collection. This project issues carbon credit verified by gold standard, which can then be sold on the voluntary carbon market. And that's it from me. I will now hand it over to you, Tara.
Thanks, Danny. We've got a bit of time left, so I'm just going to try and play a little video for us here on one of our projects. Let's see if I can get this one to work. Wonderful. I hope everybody was able to see and hear that as well, and I did the technology piece correctly. So to wrap us up here, really, I think that, this really sums up our message. I hope that you can see that on my screen. I'm getting an unusual message here. Let me just try and click a couple of buttons. Okay, perfect. That should be back with you now. So all companies do have a role to play, and being responsible is not an expense as we see it. It really is an investment into prosperity. And we don't really need anyone to be doing it perfectly. We just need everybody to be doing something. And so we really want you to look at how you can accelerate the climate impact in your company by reducing emissions, but also investing in climate projects. It really is both and not one or the other, in our opinion. And the climate can't wait. So this really is our decade for action. And it's time to start paying for our impact. So reduce, invest like our future depends on it, because ultimately it really does. And so that brings us to the end of this short webinar. Just going to have a quick look and see if some questions have come in. And Danny, if you just wanted to join me back on screen in case there are some for you. Oh, you're already there. Perfect. All right, so let's have a look. This is quite a good one. So do you think it's better to support projects close to home? I'm going to say, it does say Australia here, but we do have people in the audience that are not from Australia. So is it better to support projects close to home or ones around the world?
It's a very good question. I would say that a global problem requires a global solution. Emissions do not have borders, and neither do carbon credits. So a carbon credit generated in Australia is equivalent to a carbon credit generated in Brazil or Thailand. They will both remove or sequester 1 ton of CO2 from the atmosphere, and at the end of the day, they are all supporting the same goal.
Great, thanks, Danny. There's one here saying, can you give an example to explain the difference between the two types of nature-based project categories? So I think it was from that net zero chart, the green in the bar chart. Do you want to take that one, Danny, or do you want me to?
You can go ahead.
Yeah, no problem. So I think what you're referring to there, we had the kind of light green color and the dark green color for the nature-based solution. So that's really the difference there between avoidance and reduction, or removal, sorry, that Danny mentioned throughout her part. So an avoided project in the light green would be, avoided deforestation, for example. So like the video that we showed. And then the removal side of it would be an afforestation, reforestation project, so planting more trees, essentially. Let's see, what else do we have here? Do you have any prospective projects in the Pacific Islands? I'm probably not the best person to ask because I work in our climate solutions team rather than our projects team and don't have a full view of our whole portfolio. We've funded and developed over 850 to date, so unfortunately I don't know them all off by heart. But I certainly know that we've got a project in New Caledonia, and perhaps there are more to come as well, but we can certainly get back to you if there are any others that we have in the pipeline too. What else do we have here? There's a bit of confusion about which projects are the right ones to buy. How do we choose which projects to support? Danny, do you want to take this one, or do you want me to as well? I don't mind. I've got an answer.
We can both answer probably. It really depends as well on the company's objectives. We can look at a mixed portfolio as we saw, and it would probably change year on year. It doesn't need to stay like that the whole time. And I would also look at the co-benefits that you can probably support by buying the carbon credits. And if you want to buy the carbon credits in your area or globally, as we just said, like there's no difference in that. And if you want to say something else, Tara?
No, only thing I'd add really is that we do see most of the clients that we deal with do have a portfolio of projects that they choose from. So they might choose something locally to support their local economy and local communities, and then they might pick things, from other locations that maybe they procure from or that they operate in to match that up. Or we've seen some nice things around, what type of product do you have, what type of company do you have, and can you support other things around that? So maybe, getting access to clean water in developing countries, for example. So it really is, yeah, people definitely do a variety, and I don't think there's one project that is, or even one type of project that is the right one to buy. They are all worthwhile supporting. So it's really taking a reflection within your business to understand what types of things do you want to support, what means something to your business, and then matching up with your levels of risk as well, and how you see that reflecting in different locations, different standards, different methodologies and things like that. Okay, let me see. Got a couple more questions coming in. Have you had any experience in the blue carbon space at this point? It's a super interesting area and has so much potential. I completely agree with you, whoever said that one. We have got some experience in blue carbon. I don't want to get my facts incorrect, so I won't say what we've been involved in terms of developing methodologies or projects that we've worked on, but we definitely have a couple of our own projects that we've started to develop and are getting closer to issuance. And I can certainly provide some more details on those as well. I think our wonderful Abby in the background is noting down who's writing all of these questions, so we can get back to you as well. And I think we might have time for one more. Okay, so apart from the verifications from Gold Standard or Vera, does the South Pole team visit the project personally? If so, how often? Or under what circumstances do the South Pole team visit the projects personally? Really great question. Obviously, we have a lot of projects, and the frequency that we want to have visited those projects will be very different. So I can't answer that with one overarching statement, but yes, we do visit projects. That's kind of part of our boots on the ground approach to these projects. If you have specific questions around that when you're purchasing credits, for example, then that might be something that we're able to provide on a project to project basis. But yeah, probably not a one answer for that, unfortunately, just a little bit more complex. So wonderful. Well, that brings us to the end of this very short webinar, but we do have another couple in the pipeline, which you may or may not have signed up to already. So I think the next one is going to be on integrity of carbon credits. And there are a couple of questions around that as well, so that could be an interesting one to join. And also the third and final one is around building your portfolio. And again, a couple of questions on that. So I hope that you're able to join us for those as well. It won't be myself and Danny. You'll have some new blood in to talk you through those. So I hope you've enjoyed today. Please feel free to send through any feedback. I believe a recording will be sent to those that have registered as well shortly. So thank you so much and enjoy the rest of your days.
Thank you.